You know, there's something deeply unsettling about the way we've been taught to think about strength. What if I told you that everything you believe makes you strong, your moral certainties, your compassion, your avoidance of suffering, is actually a sophisticated form of weakness that's slowly poisoning your soul? Have you ever noticed how the people who seem the most virtuous, the most caring, the most good, are often the ones who secretly harbor the deepest resentment? You've felt it, haven't you? That subtle disgust when someone's kindness feels like manipulation, when their humility seems like a weapon. You're not crazy for noticing this. In fact, you might be one of the few people ready to understand what's really happening. This might be the most dangerous truth about human nature ever discovered. What I'm about to share has been buried, misunderstood, and violently rejected by society for over a century. Because once you see this pattern, once you understand how weakness disguises itself as strength and spreads like a contagion through our culture, you can never go back to your comfortable illusions. The philosopher who discovered this paid the ultimate price: complete mental breakdown. But his revelation about the nature of strength and weakness might be the key to your liberation. In 1889, Friedrich Nietzsche witnessed a horse being flogged in the streets of Turin, Italy. Something in that moment shattered his mind, but not before he had decoded a terrifying truth about human psychology that would take the world another century to even begin to understand. Nietzsche had spent decades observing how the weak had engineered a moral system that turned strength into sin and weakness into virtue. He called it slave morality, and once you understand how it works, you'll see its fingerprints everywhere in your life. Let me tell you what I mean, and why this matters more today than ever before. By the end of this, you'll never see kindness, morality, or even your own struggles the same way. You'll understand why your attempts to be good might be the very thing keeping you weak. But here's what nobody tells you. Recognizing this pattern is only the first step. The real transformation comes when you learn to cultivate a different kind of strength entirely. In the late 1800s, Nietzsche was walking through the universities and salons of Europe when he began to notice something disturbing. The most celebrated virtues, humility, self-sacrifice, turning the other cheek, weren't expressions of strength at all. They were the desperate inventions of the powerless, designed to make the strong feel guilty for their power. Picture this. Nietzsche is sitting in a Basel lecture hall, watching his colleagues praise meekness and submission as the highest goods. He realizes with growing horror that these aren't moral truths, they're psychological weapons. The weak, unable to compete directly with the strong, had created an entire moral system that inverted reality itself. What couldn't be achieved through force was accomplished through guilt. He called this process ressentiment, a French word that captures something deeper than mere resentment. It's the festering hatred of those who feel powerless, transformed into a moral system that poisons everyone it touches. Now, I want to be very clear about something. Nietzsche wasn't advocating for cruelty or tyranny. He was exposing how weakness corrupts even our highest ideals. The specific moment of revelation came when Nietzsche traced this pattern back through history, from Christianity's elevation of suffering, through democracy's worship of the masses, to socialism's demonization of excellence. Each system, he realized, was built on the same foundation: the weak's secret war against strength itself. But identifying the disease was only the beginning. The cure would require something far more radical. This same pattern exists today, more virulent than ever. We've been taught that strength means never showing vulnerability, that compassion always equals goodness, that suffering is something to be eliminated at all costs. Society operates on a kind of agreement. We'll all pretend that weakness is strength, as long as no one points out the deception. Think about your own life. How often have you suppressed your authentic power because it might hurt someone's feelings? How many times have you accepted mediocrity in the name of being nice? We're drowning in a sea of false compassion that keeps everyone small, safe, and secretly miserable. But what if I told you that real strength has nothing to do with domination or cruelty? What if the strongest people are those who can face life's chaos without flinching, who can embrace their own suffering as the raw material of transformation? You see, we've been looking at strength and weakness completely backwards. The truly dangerous thing is this: weakness isn't just personal, it's contagious. It spreads through pity, through moral superiority, through the thousand small ways we agree to diminish ourselves and others. Like water seeping through cracks, it finds every opening in your psyche and floods it with resentment disguised as virtue. The first thing Nietzsche discovered was that weakness doesn't simply accept its position, It wages a secret war through morality itself. The weak redefine good and evil to make their limitations into virtues and the strengths of others into sins. This isn't conscious manipulation. It's a survival mechanism so deep it reshapes reality itself. You see, slave morality is like a virus that rewrites the operating system of human values. Imagine water that flows uphill. That's what slave morality does to natural human instincts. It takes the healthy desire for growth, power, and self-expression and makes them seem evil. Meanwhile, it elevates passivity, conformity, and self-denial as the highest goods. The mechanism works through 3 stages. First, the weak experience their powerlessness as suffering. Unable to act directly, they turn inward, fermenting their frustration into resentment. Second, they create a value system where their weaknesses become moral virtues, poverty becomes spiritual wealth, powerlessness becomes meekness, and inability to take revenge becomes forgiveness. Finally, and this is the genius of it, they project their resentment outward as moral judgment. The strong aren't just different, they're evil. Success isn't just achievement, it's greed. Excellence isn't just rare, it's oppression. Through this alchemical process, weakness transforms its poison into a weapon that can fell the mightiest. But here's the truly insidious part. Even the strong begin to internalize these values. They start to feel guilty for their strength, ashamed of their achievements, apologetic for their excellence. The water of slave morality seeps into every crack of society until everyone is drowning in it, strong and weak alike. Nietzsche observed this most clearly in the rise of Christianity. The early Christians were slaves, outcasts, the powerless of the Roman Empire. Unable to match Roman strength, they created a religion that inverted every Roman value. Where Romans celebrated strength, conquest, and glory, Christians elevated weakness, submission, and humility. The meek shall inherit the earth. Think about what that really means. It's not a description of reality. It's a curse upon the strong. Nietzsche saw how Christianity conquered Rome, not through military might, but through moral infection. The Romans began to feel guilty for their power, ashamed of their vitality, suspicious of their own strength. I once knew a Roman soldier, Nietzsche might have written, who went from celebrating his victories to flagellating himself for his sins. That transformation contains the entire history of Western civilization. The philosopher observed how this moral revolution succeeded precisely because it appealed to the secret resentment in every human heart, the part that would rather tear down excellence than achieve it. This shows up in your life when you feel guilty for your success while others struggle, when you diminish your achievements to avoid making others feel bad, when you accept mediocrity in the name of fairness or inclusion. If you've ever felt like you had to hide your strength, apologize for your talents, or pretend to be less than you are, you've experienced slave morality firsthand. Notice how we celebrate failure more than success now, how we're more comfortable with victims than victors, how every story of achievement must be balanced with struggle, oppression, or disadvantage. We can't simply admire strength anymore. We need to find the weakness that explains it, that makes it palatable to our resentment-soaked culture. But that's not the most profound part of Nietzsche's discovery. You see, identifying slave morality is only the beginning. The real question is, what kind of strength can emerge once you've freed yourself from its chains? What Nietzsche found next will challenge everything you think you know about power, suffering, and the meaning of a life well lived. Now, you might be thinking, so Nietzsche just wants us all to be cruel and domineering? That's exactly the misunderstanding that keeps people trapped. True strength, according to Nietzsche, has nothing to do with dominating others. It's about something far more difficult and dangerous, embracing your own suffering as the forge of your becoming. Here's where Nietzsche's insight becomes truly radical. Your wounds aren't weaknesses to be hidden, they're the cracks where your strength enters. But only if you approach them correctly. You see, there are 2 ways to relate to suffering. The weak use it as evidence of injustice, as fuel for resentment, as an excuse for their limitations. The strong use it as raw material for transformation. Think of a seed that must break open to grow. The breaking isn't the enemy of the seed, it's the necessary condition for its becoming. Nietzsche called this amor fati, love of fate. Not passive acceptance, but active embrace. The strong person says yes to their entire life, including every moment of pain that shaped them. Moses couldn't speak, yet became the voice of God. Beethoven went deaf, yet composed his greatest symphonies in silence. These aren't inspirational stories about overcoming weakness. They're examples of weakness transformed into a unique kind of strength that couldn't exist without the wound. The broken vessel holds water differently than the perfect one. It knows where it leaks, how it must be carried, what it can and cannot contain. This knowledge, purchased with suffering, becomes a form of power unavailable to those who've never been broken. But here's the crucial point. This only works if you stop seeing your suffering as evidence that life has wronged you. Here's what happens when you shift from slave morality to what Nietzsche called master morality. First, you feel a disorienting freedom, like someone removed the ceiling you didn't know was there. You realize you've been playing a game with rules designed to ensure you lose. Then comes the vertigo. Without resentment to orient you, without victimhood to define you, who are you? This is the moment most people retreat back to the comfortable prison of slave morality. But if you persist, something remarkable happens. You begin to feel your own power, not power over others, but power to create, to choose, to become. You start to notice how your past suffering has given you specific capacities. Your wounds become weapons, not against others, but against your own limitations. That childhood trauma that made you hypervigilant? It's also what gives you the ability to read situations others miss. That failure that crushed your ego, it's what freed you from needing external validation. The process feels like drowning at first, because you are. You're drowning the false self that was built on resentment and weakness. But what emerges from those waters is something Nietzsche called the overman, not a superhuman, but a human who has overcome the need to justify their existence through moral superiority. The danger is that this process can be corrupted into its own form of slave morality. If you start believing you're superior to others because you've transcended weakness, you've simply created a new prison with shinier bars. True strength doesn't need to proclaim itself or diminish others. Here's the test. Can you honor another person's struggle without pitying them? Can you acknowledge someone's strength without feeling diminished? Can you face your own limitations without either denying them or using them as excuses? If not, you're still caught in the web of ressentiment, just with a different costume. The stakes couldn't be higher. Stay trapped in slave morality, and you'll spend your life in a prison you helped build, raging against bars you refuse to see. But break free without wisdom, and you risk becoming the very tyrant that slave morality was created to oppose. There are 5 types of inner conflicts that Nietzsche identified as essential to true strength. Most people try to resolve these conflicts, to choose one side over the other. But Nietzsche's radical insight was that strength comes from maintaining these tensions, letting them create a dynamic equilibrium within you. Each conflict is a string on an instrument. Cut any of them, and you lose the music. Number 1, the will to power versus the will to love. The weak choose one or the other, becoming either tyrants or doormats. The strong maintain both drives in creative tension. You assert your power while respecting others' power. You love without dissolving yourself. This isn't balance, it's controlled chaos. You feel both drives pulling at you, and instead of choosing, you dance between them. A CEO who builds an empire while genuinely developing their employees embodies this tension. Number 2, the need for solitude versus the need for community. Slave morality says you must be either a hermit or a social butterfly. Master morality recognizes that both drives serve evolution. In solitude, you forge your unique vision. In community, you test and refine it. The tension between these needs creates resilience. You learn to be alone without being lonely, together without losing yourself. Think of the artist who retreats to create, then returns to share, neither fully belonging nor fully separate. Number 3, the drive to create versus the drive to destroy. Creation requires destruction of old forms, outdated beliefs, comfortable illusions. The weak fear destruction and create timidly, or they destroy without building. The strong understand these as complementary forces. You burn down what doesn't serve to make room for what might. Every act of creation is also an act of creative destruction. Nietzsche himself destroyed conventional morality to create space for new values. Number 4, the love of truth versus the need for illusion. Pure truth is lethal. It would destroy the necessary illusions that make life bearable. Pure illusion is deadening. It cuts you off from reality's power. The strong person chooses their illusions consciously, using them as tools rather than crutches. You know which stories you tell yourself, and why. You can face harsh truths without being crushed, maintain hope without being naive. When you understand all these tensions together, you see what Nietzsche really meant by strength. It's not about resolving contradictions, it's about having a spirit vast enough to contain them. The strong person is a symphony of opposing forces, held together not by rigid principles but by creative will. This is what Nietzsche meant when he wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos isn't the enemy, it's the raw material." Slave morality seeks to eliminate chaos through rigid rules and resentment-based judgments. Master morality transforms chaos into creation through the alchemy of will. Remember the opening hook about strength making you weak? Now you understand. The strength that comes from moral superiority, from being good according to slave morality's standards. That's weakness wearing a mask. True strength looks like chaos to the weak. It appears dangerous because it is dangerous to every system built on resentment and limitation. This isn't just about your personal development. Entire civilizations rise and fall based on which morality dominates. When slave morality takes over a culture, you see the symptoms everywhere: celebration of victimhood, suspicion of excellence, moral regulations multiplying like cancer cells, and a general sense of decline disguised as progress. We're living through such a moment now. Our institutions increasingly run on resentment. Success is suspect. Strength is problematic. Excellence must apologize for itself. We've created elaborate systems to ensure no one feels inferior, which guarantees everyone remains mediocre. But here's what Nietzsche saw that most miss. This isn't sustainable. Reality doesn't care about our moral inversions. Cultures that embrace slave morality eventually collapse under the weight of their own resentment. They become too weak to face real challenges, too fractured by mutual suspicion to act coherently, too focused on tearing down to build anything lasting. The question isn't whether slave morality will fall, it's what will replace it. Will we simply swing back to crude domination, proving slave morality's worst fears correct? Or can we birth something new, a form of strength that neither dominates nor submits, that creates without destroying others, that achieves excellence while inspiring rather than oppressing? People will resist this truth because it threatens their entire identity structure. If you've built your sense of self on being morally superior to the cruel and selfish, discovering that your morality itself stems from resentment is devastating. It's easier to misunderstand Nietzsche, to paint him as a proto-fascist or nihilist, than to face what he's really saying. The resistance runs deeper than intellectual disagreement. It's visceral, emotional, existential. Slave morality doesn't just shape our thoughts. It patterns our nervous systems, our emotional responses, our deepest sense of right and wrong. To question it feels like questioning gravity. It's not easy to see past this conditioning. Every institution, educational, religious, political, reinforces slave morality's inversions. The weak are taught they're strong for enduring. The strong are taught they're evil for thriving. Everyone is trapped in a game where authentic power is the only forbidden move. Even reading these words, you might feel resistance rising. But what about compassion? What about justice? What about protecting the vulnerable? These aren't wrong questions, but notice how they assume strength and kindness are opposites. That assumption is slave morality's deepest victory. When one person awakens to this pattern and breaks free, something remarkable happens. They become a living contradiction to slave morality's claims. Their strength doesn't oppress, it inspires. Their power doesn't diminish others, it awakens others' power. They prove by example that strength and cruelty aren't synonymous. This creates ripples. Others sense something different about them, a quality that's hard to name but impossible to ignore. It's like they're playing by different rules, breathing different air. Some will attack them, threatened by what they represent, but others will be drawn like moths to flame, sensing a way out of their own resentment prisons. Imagine a network of such individuals, not organized by ideology, but connected by shared commitment to authentic strength. Each one a node of creation in a web of destruction. Each one proving that power doesn't require victims, that excellence doesn't demand others' failure, that strength can uplift rather than oppress. This is how cultures transform, not through mass movements or political revolutions, but through individuals who embody a different way of being. One person breaks free and shows it's possible. Another sees and follows. The network grows, invisible at first, until suddenly the old morality cracks like ice in spring. So how do you work with this knowledge without becoming the monster slave morality warns against? Here are 7 practical steps for cultivating authentic strength. Step 1. Trust your perception when something feels like disguised resentment. That discomfort when someone's kindness feels manipulative. That's your instinct detecting slave morality. Don't dismiss it, but also don't weaponize it. Simply notice and adjust your engagement accordingly. Step 2. Practice amor fati with small things first. When you're stuck in traffic, instead of resenting it, ask, how is this serving my becoming? Not in a delusional way, but genuinely exploring how irritation might be teaching you about attachment. Build this muscle gradually. Step 3. Identify your own resentments honestly. Where do you feel victimized? Where do you secretly wish the strong would fail? These aren't sins, they're data. Map your own slave morality so you can consciously choose when to transcend it. Step 4. Create without apology. Whether it's art, business, or relationships, practice bringing something into being without diminishing it to make others comfortable. Let your excellence show without arrogance, but also without false humility. Step 5. Honor others' power while maintaining your own. When someone else succeeds, practice genuine celebration without comparison. Their strength doesn't diminish yours unless you're still trapped in zero-sum thinking. Step 6. Embrace productive conflict. Don't seek peace at any price. Some tensions are creative, some conflicts necessary. Learn to engage with opposition as a dance partner, not an enemy. Step 7. Build your capacity for containing contradictions. Practice holding multiple truths simultaneously. You can be both powerful and kind, solitary and connected, creative and destructive. Expand your inner space until paradoxes feel like home. You stand at a crossroads that Nietzsche himself mapped but could not fully navigate. His mind shattered under the weight of his own revelations. But that was over a century ago. You have advantages he lacked: psychological understanding, communities of practice, and the benefit of seeing where pure master morality leads. The choice isn't between slave morality and master morality. It's between unconscious slavery to resentment and conscious creation of new values. You can neither go back to comfortable weakness nor forward to crude domination. You must forge a third path. Either you remain trapped in the game where strength is sin and weakness virtue, slowly poisoning yourself with resentment while calling it morality, or you step into the dangerous freedom of creating your own values, accepting the responsibility that comes with power, embracing the suffering that comes with growth. As Nietzsche discovered in that moment watching the horse in Turin, sometimes breaking down is breaking through. Sometimes what looks like madness is actually the birth of a new kind of sanity. Sometimes you have to lose your mind to find your soul. The question is, are you willing to pay that price for authentic strength? When you integrate this understanding, not just intellectually, but cellularly, everything changes. You'll find yourself less triggered by others' judgments because you recognize them as expressions of slave morality. You'll stop apologizing for your gifts while also losing the need to flaunt them. Your relationships transform. You attract people who celebrate strength rather than resenting it. You lose your taste for bonds built on mutual weakness. You find yourself naturally inspiring others, not through preaching but through being. You'll create more boldly because you're not creating against anyone. You're creating from your own overflow. Your ambitions expand because they're no longer limited by what others might think. Yet paradoxically, you become kinder, not from weakness but from strength that doesn't need to prove itself. Most startlingly, suffering transforms from enemy to teacher, not in a masochistic way, but recognizing it as the sculptor's chisel. You stop wasting energy, resisting what is, and invest it in shaping what could be. You achieve what Nietzsche called the great health, not the absence of illness, but the strength to transform poison into medicine. Remember when I told you about Nietzsche breaking down while witnessing a horse being whipped? There's a detail I didn't mention. In that moment of shattering, Nietzsche threw his arms around the horse's neck, weeping, and whispered, "I understand you." This wasn't weakness. It was the ultimate expression of his philosophy. He had transcended both the cruelty of the whip and the resentment of the victim. He saw the whole tragedy of existence, the strong brutalizing the weak poisoning the strong with guilt, and his heart broke open with a love that included it all. That's the final paradox of strength. It culminates not in hardness, but in a tenderness so fierce it can hold the world's pain without being crushed. Not the weak pity that stems from resentment, but the strong compassion that comes from having faced your own darkness and emerged whole. Nietzsche spent his life warning against pity, then ended it, embracing a beaten horse. Because true strength includes everything: even what seems like its opposite. You are not the same person who started reading this. Whether you realize it yet or not, seeds have been planted that will bloom in ways you can't predict. You've glimpsed the invisible prison of slave morality, felt the bars of resentment that kept you small. More importantly, you've tasted the dangerous freedom that lies beyond good and evil, not in amorality, but in creating values from strength rather than weakness. You've joined a lineage, stretching back through Nietzsche, to every human who chose growth over comfort, creation over resentment, becoming over being. You can't unlearn what you now know. Every time you encounter disguised weakness or authentic strength, you'll recognize it. Every choice between resentment and creation, you'll feel the weight of what's really at stake. The question isn't whether you'll use this knowledge. You already are. Every moment, you're choosing between slave morality and something greater. The only question is whether you'll choose consciously or let old patterns choose for you. Will you continue to play the game where weakness wins by making strength feel guilty? Or will you step into the terrifying freedom of authentic power? Will you remain safely resentful or risk the dangerous work of transformation? Here's the final truth Nietzsche discovered. We don't need another morality. We need individuals strong enough to create values that celebrate life instead of fearing it. Strong enough to include suffering without being defined by it. Strong enough to achieve without oppressing. To shine without dimming others' light. The horse is still being whipped. The question is, what will you do about it?